Hello and welcome to our webinar with Jay Biggins, the Executive Director of Biggins Lacy Shapiro. I'm Drew Trachtenberg, a veteran business journalist with long stints at CNN, Dow Jones, and currently AOL. Jay is a nationally recognized advisor to companies on how to optimize location decisions for operations as diverse as headquarters and enterprise services, R&D, manufacturing, data centers, and other activities. A key ingredient in his work is the design of creative incentives packages that impact and support client location decisions. This work has entailed developing new programs, including work on new legislation to help states be more competitive. This is the first in a series of periodic briefings on important new developments in the world of economic development incentives across the U.S. It's worth noting, if we needed any confirmation on the interest in this subject, this webinar is oversubscribed. We have a wide array of senior corporate real estate executives, brokers, attorneys, and economic development officials spanning 10 states. The first of these briefings will focus on New Jersey, where Governor Christie recently signed into law new legislation, EOA 13, which is making big news in the market. Jay, you served on the committee that helped draft this bill. Before we get into the weeds, start off by giving us a sense of the impact of EOA 13 in the market.
There's a lot of innovation going on out there. Many states are changing their programs. New York has a great new program, which we'll be covering in another webinar in another day. But among the most impactful of these nationwide is happening right here in New Jersey. The state has reinvented already strong and compelling programs into a pair of streamlined, new, and very impactful programs that focus on the two things that people care about most in the world of economic development, and that's influencing where jobs are located and influencing where capital investment occurs.
This is a very complex bill, 87 pages of details. Before getting into those details, give us an overview.
Well, in some ways, it took even a more complicated incentives toolbox and distilled 5 previous programs and preserving the DNA, the best, the most compelling elements of each of them, into 2 new programs going forward. The first is Grow New Jersey, an extremely potent tax credit program which is focused exclusively on creation of jobs and retention of jobs, and is sized to assure the attention of the C-suite of companies both throughout the region and also globally. The other is a program called the Economic Redevelopment Growth Grants. It's a fondness for acronyms in this business referred to as the ERG program. It's a mix of grants and tax credits that are designed to provide gap financing for development projects that include mixed-use as well as residential projects focused on major cities but also available in other parts of the state.
Okay, let's review the most significant changes from the previous incentive package. A checklist of key elements that business executives need to know about going forward.
Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit of a talking head here for a few minutes because there's an enormous amount of detail to get through. Let's review the most significant changes from the previous incentives, a checklist of the key elements that business executives and their representatives need to know most about. Similar to the predecessor, the basic form of incentives under the New Jersey GROW program is a transferable tax credit for job creation or retention of jobs at risk of being relocated or eliminated. The tax credit is awarded on a 10-year basis, on a per-job basis. Because the credits are transferable, any credits in excess of a company's New Jersey tax liability can be sold to other taxpayers. The credits can be applied to the corporate income tax and the gross premium tax that are paid by insurance companies. We'll cover the market dynamics for the sale of these credits a little later in this briefing. But there are many differences between the Grow New Jersey program and its predecessors. But before getting into the details, the most important difference is sheer scale. The potential amount of these incentives is the key difference. As context, whereas a previous program, the Business Incentive Employment Program, which everyone knows as the BEEP program, one of the most emulated programs throughout the nation, it had a statutory maximum of $50,000 per job over 10 years. Whereas the new Grow New Jersey program begins at $50,000 per job in many parts of the state, and under certain circumstances can reach up to $150,000 per job.
Let's try to put some of those numbers into perspective. What does that mean in ways companies make their location decisions.
Let's take a specific scenario, which is a project that we're working on today. Assume a company has 500 jobs outside of New Jersey, but considering locating in New Jersey, and considering one of New Jersey's urban transit hubs. That would include Jersey City, Newark, New Brunswick, and there are 6 others. The annual tax credit could reach $12,000 per job per year, and with a typical density of, say, 200 to 250 square feet per employee, that amount translates to between $50 and $60 per square foot per year. That's well more than the rent for an existing Class A office building and is enough to amortize the costs of new construction. While many projects won't attain this level of incentive, and there are many variables, and these levels represent statutory maxima for each of these levels, and there's still much in the way of evaluation and negotiation around the project specifics. But this program provides the framework for significant incentives that can be catalytic for many communities around the state.
We certainly want to come back to a lot of that information you just gave us and the competitive impact these incentives have at these levels. But let's build the foundation here. Let's go back to surveying the new incentive landscape in New Jersey. Aside from the scale, give some of the other important ways the Grow New Jersey program differs from its predecessors.
Okay, reviewing some of the most important differences to companies and their advisors. In brief, they are jobs, capital investment, and location. Whereas the previous programs had very high capital investment minima, ranging from $20 million to $50 million per project, as well as very high minimum job thresholds, ranging from 100 to 250 jobs per project. Going forward, both the minimum CapEx and the minimum employment requirements are significantly lower and are now calibrated to the specific type of project involved. I'm going to put up a slide here which lays out the specific capital investment and employment minimums for different types of projects. And you can see these are all very accessible levels for specific projects to achieve. The new Grow New Jersey program also has much broader geographic footprint, essentially statewide, except for areas that are considered environmentally sensitive, whereas the previous programs were limited to the urban areas and to established suburban areas. However, the new incentives continue to reflect and even strengthen the state's commitment to smart growth goals by emphasizing employment in urban areas, especially the urban transit hubs, distressed cities, and then in particular 4 newly designated Garden State growth zones, which include Camden, Trenton, Passaic, and Patterson. These location priorities are reflected in varying so-called base credit amounts, as are shown in the following table. Now, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but these slides are all going to be available to anyone who'd like to refer to them later. But the key things to focus on here are the base credit amounts, which you can see vary depending upon where in the state and the levels of economic distress and the economic development priorities of the state. The maximum amounts per job per year, which operate as a cap in each of these geographic venues, and then the maximum amounts per project, which also reflect, and you can see, vary based on the location of the project. The new program also employs highly targeted series of tax credit bonuses to further encourage projects that meet various state planning and economic development goals. Here, too, I invite you to go through it in detail at your leisure, but all it takes is a brief survey of this hierarchy of bonus amounts, and you can see that virtually every important economic development goal of New Jersey, and candidly most states that we work with around the country, are reflected here with different sort of pricing signals that help companies decide to locate in areas and to undertake the types of projects that the state is interested in encouraging. What these bonuses really mean is that for impactful projects, especially those in the targeted areas, including transit hubs and the Garden State growth zones, the total tax credit awarded can be 2x or 3x the base tax credit for that project. We'll put all of these dimensions together in a couple of case studies a little bit later that will demonstrate how powerful these incentives can be, especially for so-called mega projects with large numbers of jobs, even in established urban markets.
There's a great deal of material there to absorb. If anyone on the webinar wants a copy of those graphics, Jay's team at BLS will be happy to provide them. I remind you to submit your questions. There's a button on your screen to do so. We'll have time to get to a few questions later in this webinar. And for those that we don't get to today, Jay and his staff will respond by email over the next week or so. Okay, Jay, the new law seems to focus on counties in South Jersey. It lowers eligibility criteria and awards additional bonuses. Why the South Jersey focus, and how do you think this will impact location decisions?
Well, the background here is that with some notable exceptions, the southern New Jersey locations have not participated in the same level of development, and certainly not the same level of incentives as their neighbors to the north, especially cities like Jersey City, Newark, and New Brunswick, which have seen enormous development. In some cases, the levels of development that have not been seen in generations. One of the challenges has been that the minimum project sizes in the previous law basically made projects in South Jersey ineligible, where projects are generally a somewhat smaller scale. As noted, the new law reduces the capital investment minimums as well as the job minimums so that New Jersey's South Jersey communities can actually present projects that will qualify under the new program. But the primary focus has been Camden, where the state has long subsidized the city and is determined to find a way for this city to achieve a level of development that can begin to make it of the kind of vibrant place that it can be and become financially self-sufficient. The incentives are designed to be truly catalytic in Camden. What I'd like to do is take a look at one of the options. In Camden, companies can elect the more favorable of two formats. One is the base and bonus format that we described before, and again, folks can take a look at that, at that table at their leisure. But there's another option here for capital-intensive projects in Camden. I'm going to put up another slide for everyone to review. You can see that projects with relatively low job thresholds, but significant capital investment, can elect to receive their incentives sized to the amount of capital investment. Now, taking a step back, what this means is full capital cost recovery for projects that can satisfy these job and capital investment criteria, solely for new jobs and solely in the city of Camden.
During the recession, the greatest challenge was retaining existing jobs. In the current economic environment, how is New Jersey distinguishing between new jobs and retained jobs?
New Jersey is something of a bellwether on this issue. As the regional economy has begun to improve, New Jersey has retooled its incentives with regard to the distinction between retained and new jobs. Whereas in the previous law, a retained job equaled a new job, and they were eligible to receive the same value of incentives. Under the new law, retained jobs are able to achieve only 50% of what a new job can achieve in the states, clearly signaling a turning of the corner, but also signaling that the state's limited resources are going to be invested primarily on new job creation.
Jay, I know you prepared for this presentation some illustrations, some case studies. Why don't you walk us through some of those?
Sure. Really the only way to animate and understand all of this detail is through specific projects, and probably everyone on this call has one or more projects that are on their minds. What I've done here is created 3 case studies, and I'm not going to go through them in detail, but basically the first slide refers to a Jersey City project. This would be a financial services company that is in Jersey City already, but having 500 jobs that are at risk of leaving, but also considering creating 200 new jobs. They might need 200,000 square feet of existing office space and be investing approximately $10 million, or roughly $50 per square foot. As you can see here, we've laid out the base amount of $5,000 per job, and then the potentially applicable bonus amounts. These are all per year values. You can see that the retained jobs are equal only 50% of the new jobs. So when you put the 700 jobs, mixed, retained, and new together, this project is able to accomplish roughly $38 million over 10 years. That's roughly $19 per square foot when looked at on an annual basis. The next case study illustrates another interesting dimension of this law. Unless a project is located in an urban transit hub or one of the distressed cities or the Garden State growth zones, distribution centers, which are basically characterized by relatively low jobs and relatively modest salaries, important for the overall economic development strategy of any state, but an important limitation in this law imposes a significant limitation on the amount of incentives that such projects can achieve. This law requires that projects other than in these targeted areas be limited in the incentives that they can achieve to 90% of the withholdings of the jobs that are created or retained. So if we look at a project such as the example shown below, and this is also illustrative of several projects that we have in-house today, the nominal amount of incentives based on the maxima that are set forth in the new statute would indicate potentially $600,000 per year. But when you impose the 90% limitation, 90% withholding limitation, this project can only achieve $180,000 per year, a small fraction of the nominal amount that would otherwise appear to be available, and certainly would have been available if this project had been located in one of the designated areas within the state where that limitation does not apply. The final slide refers to a Camden project, and here we're going to illustrate that the choice, the election that this new law gives to project with new jobs in Camden alone. This is a capital-intensive project with 150 new jobs with $50 million of capital investment, 400,000 square foot manufacturing facility. If the company goes first through the typical base and bonus calculation, you'll see that it can achieve $13,000 per job, still a very compelling number. That's per year. But the election that this company can make, having satisfied the capital investment job minimums for this specific format, the so-called enhanced CapEx-based incentives program, this project can receive recovery of full capital investment. That would equate to $33,000 per job per year, full capital cost recovery over 10 years.
Jay, let me walk us back a step. You mentioned earlier that the tax credits were transferable. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Right. So transferable tax credits is a very important innovation. There are several states that use transferable tax credits. New Jersey has learned from all of them in perfecting this feature. It's important to note that tax credits that are not transferable or refundable, such as New York's are, can basically become worthless. Companies that don't have sufficient tax liability, their value of the tax credits is either diluted or eliminated. In New Jersey, companies that can't use all of a tax credit can sell any excess. There are parameters, however. They cannot be sold for less than 75 cents on the dollar. So if the market were only 74 cents, they would become effectively worthless. However, we've basically undertaken around $300 million of these tax credit trades just in the last 18 months. And we can tell you that based on our experience, the real market for these credits is 90 cents per dollar or better.
With so much at stake, some people have started to refer to the New Jersey GROW as the free building program. How do companies access these incentives, and what are the barriers and conditions to that access?
So, yeah, these incentives are so valuable, it's important that their use be regulated and carefully guarded so that they are available only to projects for which they were intended. The New Jersey Economic Development Authority is one of the most effective state entities in the country in doing due diligence into project applications to make sure that the statutory purposes are satisfied. The most important consideration is that the applicant has to demonstrate that the incentives are a material factor in the location decision, and that's a decision to locate, move to New Jersey, or to retain jobs in New Jersey. The CEO of the company has to certify that he or she has read the application and conducted inquiry into its contents, and that they would not undertake the project but for the incentives. And that's a very complex standard, and you can imagine that the discussion in the C-suite before the CEO signs that application is intensive and exhibiting the kind of care that is required. In addition, all applicants have to demonstrate that the project, inclusive of the incentives for which they are applying, would be offset by benefits to the state, measurable benefits to the state, equally at least 10% more than the total value of the incentives. There's also a special due diligence that this new law for the first time requires the state to impose upon projects of a particular size. Every project that is seeking more than $40 million is required to go through a special analysis in which the state is required to inquire into how much is really needed to get the project done, how much would be required for New Jersey to be successful. And if it's for less than the amount of the statutory maxima in the statute, or less than the amount that the applicant has applied for, New Jersey EDA is obligated to pursue a lower number to see if they can be successful. There are two other important requirements, not thresholds so much for the discretionary decision by EDA, but requirements of projects. One is a prevailing wage, and many of the folks on this call have had some experience with this. In many cases, prevailing wage will add costs to the project. It applies to the construction labor, even for renovations. And so it's important to evaluate the relative value of the incentives versus the increased costs associated with the prevailing wage. In addition, all projects are required to satisfy the so-called green building standard. This is basically requiring certain energy efficiency and sustainability standards. They are going to be flexibly applied based on the specifics of each project, but it's important to know that these requirements are there and to evaluate how they can apply to each project.
Jay, given the enormous value of these incentives, they are probably pretty hard to keep. Tell us a bit about what companies need to do to stay in compliance.
The statute is pretty clear. Each project needs to maintain at least 80% of the project employment, so the number of jobs for which the tax credits have been approved and which tax credits are being awarded. And that's every year for 10 years. In addition, the state has always regulated the level of statewide employment as well to guard against situations where jobs are being reduced statewide while incentives are being provided to jobs that are in a particular location. So companies are also required to maintain 80% of their statewide employment, and that base for the statewide employment is established basically at the end of the applicant's tax year. So it looks back at a point in time so that 80% of that baseline cannot be manipulated. If either of these 80% thresholds is pierced, then the project will risk forfeiture of the tax credits for that year. It does not result in a recapture by itself. And a company that restores its employment to above these thresholds can resume taking tax credits for the remainder of their term. A company that takes the tax credits and then shuts down and leaves New Jersey altogether, or a company that falls below the statutory minimum eligibility levels for their specific type of project, they run the risk of recapture. And the recapture is basically a function of a proportional remedy based upon the number of years in which the company was faithfully performing their obligations under their agreement, such that the amount of recapture is typically going to be reasonably predictable, but still can be quite painful.
Jay, that's a lot of information, very informative stuff. We have time for a few questions that have been submitted by some of the distinguished people listening in. First question, does the project need to be competitive with the site outside of New Jersey?
Under the Grow New Jersey program, the requirement of a material factor is effectively a competitive question. It could potentially be, and has been in some cases, a question of financial feasibility, of whether to undertake a project at all. But in most cases, especially when we're talking about large employers considering various locations for a project, the question will really be one of where, not if, such that the only way to really satisfy the statutory requirement that the CEO demonstrate that the incentives are a material factor in the location decision is to put a competitive context in that, and that is other states have to be under consideration, or potentially other countries.
Next question. This is a complicated or a multi-part question. What is the outlook for availability of these credits? Is there a cap? Can a New York City company safely assume credits that will be available in 2016?
The previous Grow New Jersey program had a statutory cap, and as many will remember, as the state neared that cap, it created an enormous amount of uncertainty in the market and began to potentially become an impediment to New Jersey's ability to compete. Having learned from that experience, the new New Jersey Grow program is without a cap, such that companies considering relocating to New Jersey or growing in New Jersey can make plans knowing that there will not be an arbitrary cap that may frustrate those plans in the future.
Very good, Jay. One final question for you. Have noticed capital investment bonuses, which are large, are they limited to industrial projects? Do you have insight on why this is the case?
Yes, there are capital investment bonuses for industrial projects, but not for commercial projects. By that, we are referring primarily to office buildings. And the rationale for that is that there's a significant inventory of vacant office space in the state, so that the law effectively balances competing considerations in a thoughtful way, in that it stops short of inducing new construction with specific capital investment bonuses that would make moving into a new building on par significantly more valuable than moving into an existing building.
Very good, Jay. Again, that's a tremendous amount of information, and I'll remind people viewing the webinar, if anyone wants a copy of the graphics that we displayed, Jay's team at BLS will be happy to provide them. You can call or email, and they'll get that out to you as soon as possible. Jay Biggins of Biggins Lacy Shapiro, thank you very much.